So this is how we die now. We cheat sleep, and we don't realize it's sleep that causes us to die, but it causes the top three leading death causes in the United States: stroke, diabetes, heart disease, are all directly tied to sleep.
This is the Badass Dad Pod, where we quest to live our best lives relationally, physically, and financially, no matter what age we are. Welcome to the squad, fellow badass. We're getting motivated to take it easy this episode. Actually, we're talking with Michael Voss about better sleep. Michael is a biohacker who spent 15 years researching and analyzing his own sleep habits. He logged over 2,000 nights of his own sleep data. He assembled his findings into a book called The War on Sleep: How It Started, How We Lost, How You Can Recover. And he now sleeps better than 98% of the people on Earth. And guess what? He's ready to reveal to you how you can up your sleep game too. So let's get into this. My name is Ryan Dunn. I'm a fellow journeyer on the quest for awesome, marquee of motivation, a protectorate of masculinity. I'm a level 6 relationship ranger, a level 7 gym warrior, level 3 debt mage, and your lawful good podmaster. Are you ready to level up your sleep? Are you ready to stop waking up so tired each morning? You ready to pack on some more quality Z's? Well, Michael Voss is here to lead the way, so let's go. Mike Voss, thanks so much for joining us. I feel like we have so much in common. Even though we've just met, in reading your book, I felt several points of connection. We're both men of a certain distinguished age. We both exhibit an obsession in trying to live like biohacked, well-led lives, healthy lives. And I also found out that we endorse the same brand of nasal hair trimmer, which I feel like that puts us in a pretty tight fraternity there. It is. I'm going to make folks read the book to figure out what brand that is. When I got into your book, I started tracking my own sleep score. Last night, I scored an 80. What'd you score last night?
I'm a little off for the past 3 weeks. And the reason being, in the book, I mentioned that at some point I'm going to get this one final surgery I need. And I finally got it 3 weeks ago. It's a surgery called UPPP, which is to fix some things in the back of the throat. And it's not for the faint of heart. Yeah. And until I fully recover from that, I'm not going to get normal sleep again. So I'm in like the high 70s right now, which for me is quite low. But until all the swelling and stuff goes away. In fact, we even had to delay this podcast a bit because I didn't feel confident that I could talk for an extended time. So yeah, I'm probably going to have to delete all my data for 3 weeks because it's going to be so skewed by the recovery.
High 70s though, actually, in looking at just my own habits, it's actually probably above where most people are. Do you think?
Oh yeah. When I first started, I was in the mid 50s and low 60s consistently, which was just awful.
What's the highest you've gotten?
I have scored 100 on many occasions. Yeah, and wow. What was really interesting was when the pandemic first started, as I expected, I saw a dip in my sleep scores. And I realized okay, with all that's going on in the world, I'm going to have to really focus on my sleep. And at one point, I think it was I can't remember what month it was, maybe March or April of last year, I scored 700 or 800 night sleep scores in a row, which has never happened. Like I've done 2 in a row, occasionally, maybe 3 or 4 in 1 week, but I had more than a week solid in a row. And that was just really a demonstration of that I really have learned some things and that I can apply them even more when I need to.
I hope that we'll get into some of those tips that help lead our audience towards that 100 sleep score. But first, I want to back up a little bit. You're not a sleep scientist by training. What triggered this obsession with sleep and sleep habits?
No, I'm a computer scientist by training. I have a minor in psychology.
Okay.
And applied astrophysics, not things that generally relate to sleep. So while I'm not, a doctor and an MD, anything like that, my father was an MD, DDS, actually oral surgeon. And so I was brought up around all kinds of things. His office was in our house when I was growing up. So, my sisters and my mom were his dental assistants, and it wasn't unheard of for me to be walking by and get pulled into his office to help him with a procedure or something. So I had an unusual childhood in that respect. So I was always comfortable with kind of bio things to improve performance or, for healing and things like that growing up. And I got into my 20s and 30s, I got interested in athletic performance. And in my 30s, before there was a word biohacker, I definitely was one. And we were into biohacking athletic performance with all kinds of different things that are now pretty commonplace. Sleep didn't really come up on my radar until I was maybe in my late 30s, early 40s. And I kind of started noticing some things, but they didn't really register. Like I knew that I snored. Thinking back now, I knew in college that I snored. Just the first time I was with a roommate in the same room, people told me. I knew that I needed naps a lot during the day, but I thought that was normal. I knew that I would drool when I would sleep. I thought that was normal. All these things. And I just kind of like the majority of people, I just filed them away like, oh, that's just how things work. And then in 2005, through a series of unusual events that I go into in the book, I had one night where I ingested something that made my nasal passages wide open and I went to sleep. And I woke up the next day and I felt fantastic. I mean, I'd been out late, I'd been drinking, doing some stuff, and I thought like I was going to have it was a Friday night. I thought tomorrow morning's going to be terrible. And I woke up and I felt so good. I was like, something is not right here. Like, why do I feel this good today and not every day? And just the contrast was so stark. I just realized every night of sleep that I can have in current memory was terrible compared to that one. And I want that one again. And then I went on this 15-year odyssey to figure out why that had happened and to decode the mysteries of that sleep. And that's how I got to where I can sleep 100% 7 or 8 nights in a row during a global pandemic.
What do you think are some of the most common factors that lead us into poor sleep?
Well, the first one is that we're born into a society that has been destroying sleep for several generations. As a scientist, I try to not just apply a fix to something. I try to understand a problem and then apply solutions that logically should work. And the first thing I realized is like, okay, everybody around me is like this. Why? We all are snoring. We're all sleeping badly. We're all cheating sleep. Why is that? Well, societally, that has become the norm. So then I asked the larger question, well, why and when did this happen? And if we look into things, people today are sleeping on average 90 minutes less than our ancestors just like 2 or 3 generations ago. Now, if we look at that and ask why, as a scientist, I see, about 150 years ago, we harnessed electricity and started putting electric lighting in everywhere. And that was the beginning of the end, because up until that point, we had basically fire and candles and gas, which, we were still able to stay up a little later and work a little later and stuff. But those are a different kind of light. Those are more red lights, which, fire light and such is actually conducive to sleeping. You really can't do a lot by a fire. Okay. White light, electric light, fluorescent light, like we use today, is impossible to sleep by. So when we opened Pandora's box at that point, everything was fair game. We started running factories 24 hours a day, and shift work became something people were doing. We started cheating sleep and thinking we could do more and spend less time doing it, but we didn't stop. And, it's one of those classic situations where we saw that we could, but we didn't think about if we should. And every mammal on the face of the earth sleeps. And if sleep was something that was of no use, it would have been evolved out a very long time ago, because, you're out on the savannah and you're unconscious for 7 or 8 hours and you're a target for everything's dinner that might come by. Why would you do that?
Right.
Because you have to. So when I looked at it in that context, the first thing I realized was like, okay, everybody around me is doing sleep a certain way, and I'm pretty sure that they're all wrong. And I also kind of realized we're much more resilient when we're in our 20s and 30s. When I was in my 30s, my late 20s and 30s, I could work all week 50 hours, drive from LA or from Orange County, where I lived, up 50 miles up to LA, party with my friends till 4 a.m, drive home at 5 a.m, do it again Saturday night, and then go to work on Monday, no problem. If I tried to do that today, I would die.
Right. Yeah.
So I kind of realized, okay, maybe I've had these habits most of my life, and now I'm getting old enough in my 40s that, I can't pay the piper anymore. Like, I'm writing checks I can't cash. And that night of sleep that I had was illustrating something to me. And so I started focusing in on reproducing that, figuring out what it was, and seeing if I could get back to, how sleep was when I was a kid or in my teens, when it was just like I switched off and I woke up and I felt great. Oh, gosh, in our teens, I think we all sleep fantastic until some point in our teens when the thing that kills it is usually starting school, because it's another societal mistake we've made. And we probably did this so that parents could get to work on time, but school start times are now recognized to be way too early. You're at a developmental point in your life when you're in you're young and you're in your teens, where you need sleep, and you need more sleep than I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, if I think back, I would just switch off and be asleep, and I'd be awake the next day, and it never even registered. Like, my sleep was solid. It was great. Yeah. All kinds of great dreams and stuff. And then sometime around junior high or high school is the first time I remember consciously being like dragged out of bed in the morning by an alarm and getting to school, and just like, like that kid in Ferris Bueller's Day Off who's like asleep on his desk drooling. I remember doing that.
Yeah, been there too.
So that's where it starts. And then it doesn't really stop, because, we have summer vacation and we kind of make up for some of it. We sleep until, noon, or I remember sleeping until 1 p.m. on summer vacations. And, you're a teen, you're growing. I was growing until I was 22. So you need that time. That's when your cells are repairing. Then off to college. And it was like even worse, because even though we could get up when we wanted to, we were, out all night partying and then studying and marathon sessions and things, and just taking those habits even further. And you would think, okay, so maybe when you get out of college and get into the workforce, it's going to get better, but it just doesn't. We just keep we've ingrained the habits by then. And by then in the 20s, I heard someone talking on Clubhouse this morning about how, it works for him to be a night owl, and, he didn't go to sleep until 6 a.m. I didn't have a chance to talk to him, but I was like, no, it doesn't work. It works until it doesn't. And you can do it when you're in your 20s and 30s, but he was around 31 and he was finding like he's having some problems now. He's getting into diabetic range, he's gaining weight, and so I was one of those people. But in the computer field, everybody does that in their 20s. They're working inverted hours and things like that, and they think it's great for them. But you know what? It's not. But you can tolerate it. But it's like being a prize fighter. You can only do it for so many years, and then you pay for it, and you pay dearly for it in the aftermath. I knew people who worked with me at places who were on third shift, and they just had this thing about laughing at people for being, diurnal as opposed to nocturnal. And I know those people now, and they are very regretful of what they've done to their health and their sleep cycles over the years. That's what I think societally we do ourselves real damage. And then later we're asking, well, this is the stunning thing. If you look at the main leading causes of death, the top 10 over the past 200 years in the United States, all top 10 today, except for maybe one, are directly related to sleep disturbances. None of them were, other than influenza, were in the top 10 150 years ago. So this is how we die now. We cheat sleep, and we don't realize it's sleep that causes us to die, but it causes the top 3 leading death causes in the United States: stroke, diabetes, heart disease, are all directly tied to sleep and disruptions. So I really think that societally we've changed the way that we die now because we don't sleep properly anymore.
You noted that we used to call sitting the new smoking, but really it's poor sleep is the new smoking. Have you seen, beyond the grumpiness and just the general lag that it leads into our lives, are there other things happening physiologically when we refuse to sleep, in a sense that, how is that slowing us down and pushing us towards diabetes?
It's fascinating because I've seen studies where this is done, and they take a perfectly healthy guy in his early 20s, and they cut him down to 4 hours of sleep a night. And this was done in hospital lab, facilities, and he was closely monitored. And then he went to his normal work and things during the day. The guy was an EMT, by the way. He was an ambulance tech, the one that I'm thinking of. And within, I think, 5 days, his blood chemistry was already into the pre-diabetic range. So just 5, and this is a perfectly healthy guy in his 20s. So imagine for, you're in your 50s and you're not perfectly healthy. But in 5 days, he brought himself into pre-diabetic range. Now, if he had stayed on that path, he would have been diabetic, type 1 diabetic, probably in no time, maybe a matter of just months. So there's this vicious cycle. I don't know if you ever notice, if you stay awake a really long time, you start getting hungrier more and more frequently. And you start craving things, like you'll eat anything. You get to the point where you start craving things, and the amount of time that the hunger is satiated after you eat something gets shorter and shorter. At least it does for me and most of the people I know. I think vast majority of people, that's true. And that's not a coincidence, because when you're sleep deprived, the hormonal regulators in your system called leptin and ghrelin, which are the ones that tell you, I've had enough to eat or I'm hungry, they both get kind of reversed. And one starts telling you, I haven't had enough to eat. And the other one starts telling you, I'm hungry all the time. These are the precursors to all the bad things that can happen. And what happens here is if you get into that pattern, like you go on shift work and you start doing this and you start eating a lot of stuff, you start to gain weight. And if you start to gain weight, most people will gain weight in the neck area. And being just like 20 or more pounds overweight can cause you sleep apnea in no time flat. Sleep apnea then further deteriorates your sleep, and the process is just self-perpetuating. So all it takes. So in many cases, I know friends who are MDs, and they've had patients come in who had terrible diabetes and they were overweight, and they just gave them CPAP therapy, which is a mask that goes over the nose or the nose and the mouth and provides constant pressure while they're sleeping, and been able to break one side of that cycle. So they were able to sleep well. They got out of the pre-diabetic range. They were able to exercise. They lost weight. And after losing X pounds, they no longer had the problem. And as long as they kept aware of, keeping a proper sleep cycle and eating well and exercising a little bit, they never went back into that problem. And I mentioned in the book that it's my opinion that diet, exercise, and sleep are the three pillars of life. And those are the things you have to keep in balance. If one of them gets out of balance, it's going to need attention, or the other two will, and your overall health will suffer. If two get out of balance, you will have problems rapidly, and you will do something like go into the pre-diabetic range. If all three are out of balance, your time is limited. You're going to get diabetic, you're going to get heart disease, something's going to happen, and you're going to have a shortened life.
In talking about sleep apnea and snoring, I hunch that a lot of us are snorers. Is snoring a symptom of poor health, or is it the cause of our poor sleep?
It is both, generally speaking. There is no, and I've heard some debate on this, there is no such thing as benign or good snoring. Just there is not. Any snoring,
so it's not an indication that we're just having super deep sleep, that we're kind of dead to the world, as they say.
That's kind of what we've painted it as for years. If you look at cartoons and things, I was growing up, like someone's sleeping peacefully, they're making this terrible noise, and there's saws in the background, and it's always been viewed as something kind of humorous and whimsical. And mark my words, it is not. It is a serious matter. It is the sound of someone starving for air, and it is literally the sound of death. It is a long, protracted death, but it is absolutely bad for you. And I think we need to change how we look at it. There's no acceptable amount of snoring. I mean, if you snore 2 or 3 minutes a night while you're changing position, which I still do from time to time, that's nothing. But when you get into the range of 10 minutes or more of snoring a night, that's enough to disrupt one cycle of sleep, which is enough to disrupt your whole night. But I talk about in the book, I've had changes in my medications and things that suddenly pushed me into 90 minutes plus of snoring a night out of nowhere. And I can tell you that is just terrible. You feel awfully, and you can feel like I am going to die if I don't get this fixed. You're just so sick at that point. And when you're younger, if you're in your 20s or 30s, it won't feel quite that bad because you've got a lot more resilience. But if you're 40 or over, you will really feel it if you are snoring on a regular basis and not getting proper sleep.
So a 100 sleep score night probably does not include snoring.
Every 100 sleep score night I've ever had 0 snoring.
Okay.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. And to your previous question too, you asked about how these things manifest. There's also a short-term way they will manifest as well. People talk about that they can go for days without sleeping, things like that. And don't believe a word of it. Okay. In medical texts today, they say that the longest anyone can go is 10 days without sleep. I would say it's closer to 3. But the fact is, after about somewhere between 24 and 48 hours without sleep, your brain will start doing what we call stealing cycles in the computer world, which means you will sleep, but you just won't be aware of it.
Yeah. Okay.
I've seen this in that same study we were talking about, where the guy was just down to 4 hours a night. After 3 days, they wired him up with full brain sensors and respiration and everything, and they put him on a test track in a car and had him drive. And in 15 minutes, he had technically been asleep like 35 times. He's driving a vehicle, okay, and he has no idea. I mean, he's actually asleep for a couple, and it might be microseconds, but it might be the microsecond when a light is changing or when a child is crossing the road or something. So you can't go that long without sleep. And when you push yourself, in concerted efforts like that, you're going to be sleeping. You're just not going to know when it's going to happen.
So in light of what we've learned about the negative outcomes of lack of sleep, what is something that we can eliminate today, most of us, that would lead us in one step towards more healthy sleep habits?
I would say the number one thing is forget about using an alarm clock to wake up. If you need an alarm clock to wake up, you haven't had proper or sufficient sleep. And I haven't used one in over a decade now, maybe 2 decades, because that's one of the first things I stopped doing before I even ever started focusing on sleep. I just reasoned if I need an alarm clock, I must not be well enough rested. You don't see, lions and tigers and coyotes don't have alarm clocks. But lions and tigers and coyotes, when the sun goes down, they go to sleep. They don't scream. If you watch your pets, like you'll be up working late or something, and your dog will be over in the corner because he knows it was bedtime, a couple hours after the sun went down, and he's adhering to that cycle, unlike we are. So getting rid of an alarm to wake up and instead setting an alarm to get to bed at the same time every night is probably the single best thing you can give up and do. Because early on, and I mentioned this in the book and I talk about it, one of the surprising discoveries I found was that the more consistently I got to bed within a certain time range, the better I slept. And whenever the lines they mirror each other. When I would get to bed at a worse time, my sleep would get worse. And when I would get to bed closer to the same time, it would get better. And they just converged and diverged like in lockstep. So there's no question about that a consistent bedtime is more important than an alarm to wake up.
What's your rhythm of sleep? What time are you setting that alarm to send you to bed as opposed to waking up?
It goes up. I shoot for between 10 and 11 p.m. and I'm generally waking up between 7:30. So I've got some margin and this is another thing too. So I was listening to people talk today about how much time they sleep. And unless you're using some kind of a sleep tracker, there can be a very big difference between the time you go to bed and the time you're actually sleeping. And that was another of the interesting correlations that I found when I first started tracking my sleep is that time to bed versus sleep time can vary greatly. After all these years, I've gotten it to where it's generally not more than 20 minutes before I fall asleep once I get to bed. And that's great. But I mean, there were times when it was an hour, 2 hours before I got to sleep. And I might have been in bed for 8 hours, but I only slept for 6. So I think a lot of people would do that and say, I slept 8 hours last night, but they really only got 6. And because they're not using anything to chart their sleep and get metrics, they don't really know how long they slept.
For many of us, getting to bed isn't the biggest hurdle. It's staying in bed once that nighttime comes in. Can you think of a couple tips that will help people to, prolong their sleep state once they're in bed?
Yeah, generally speaking, if you can work to train yourself to not get out of bed for anything that you really don't need to get out of bed for, that's very helpful. And I've done this because it's not uncommon for me to wake up once or twice a night because a loud car goes by or something. And I'll wake up, I'll kind of take inventory of myself. Is there anything I really need to get out of bed for? And if the answer is no, I'll go back to sleep. Sometimes in the morning, I need to sleep late, but I've had construction next door that starts at 7 for about 2 years now. God help me. Sometimes if I have had to stay up later or something, I want to shift my sleep window and I want to sleep past when it's light out in the morning, when there's noise going on. So I'll just reach for earplugs and a face mask and I'll go back to sleep and sleep later. And when that happens, if I need to use the restroom or something, I've trained myself, I can go to the restroom and back without taking that mask off. I know where everything is. I can keep that light up because just a few seconds.
Is it it's 7 steps straight and then 3 steps
right? Yeah, I know,
right,
I'm along the bed and then it's then I'm in open space and then there's the wall and the door. It's pretty easy to do. And it sounds crazy, but it really makes a difference not getting a minute of bright sunlight in my eyes when I'm trying to go back to sleep. It really does make a difference. Luckily, I don't have to do that very often, but using these habits to just it's just kind of it's so common to wake up and think okay, I'll flip on the phone, I'll do this, I'll do that. I don't do it. My phones and my devices the radios are off at night. If someone dies, they're still going to be dead in the morning. There's really precious few things I need someone to wake me up for more than I need a good night's sleep to deal with whatever's going on the next day. So I just adhere to that. So training yourself is a big part of it. Also, a lot of people, men in particular, wake up and need to urinate at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a theory.
I've heard that happens.
Yeah. Now I had that problem for sure when I first got into looking into my sleep. 2-3 times a night was not uncommon. And at some point, I formed a theory about this, and I started testing it, and it worked. For me, it turned out to be true. And I think that we wake up to urinate because we wake up to urinate, not because we need to. And explain what I mean by that is that, the bladder is a flexible vessel, and a flexible vessel like the stomach or the bladder can become conditioned depending on how much volume it's, regularly made to hold versus how little. If you don't eat for a long time, everybody's familiar with the concept of their stomach shrinking and they don't need to eat as much or they can't eat as much. Your bladder works the same way. And normally the longest period of time your bladder is going to go without emptying is that 8 hours, 7 hours that you're asleep at night. So if you wake up and you empty your bladder and go back to sleep, now your bladder has been being conditioned to be exactly half as full at its maximum capacity than it was before. So at some point I started testing this out and I said, okay, if I wake up and feel the need to go to the restroom, I'm going to try not to. I'm going to try to go back to sleep. And obviously you have to make a judgment call here. And it might be a matter of doing it only twice versus 3 times a night and then going from there. After some period of time, it must have been like a year or 2, I got to where I can go the whole night. And it took me a long time to where I could sleep a whole night. Anyway, it took me years. But I got to where I could sleep a whole night, 7, 8, 9 hours without waking up and without going to the restroom. And that was a real triumph for me. And it also helps with your bladder capacity during your waking hours. There's no reason why it would be different for women, but I think for men, it's more of a problem.
I feel like that bears repeating, that oftentimes we wake up and then we feel like we need to go to the bathroom. We're not waking up because we need to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, we kind of wake up and we take inventory because generally when we wake up in the morning, that's the first thing we think. And like sometimes in the morning I wake up now, I don't relieve myself for an hour, because I've just really changed my thinking. So habit is a big part of it, and if you can change that habit and if you can make yourself, even if it's just like, okay, I normally wake up at 1 a.m. and I have to go, even if you can push it to 3 a.m. or if you normally wake up twice and you can do it once, over time, it's going to make a difference. I mean, at least it has for me. And I should say, when it's something like this, and if you're a man and you're over, 35, be sure to check with the doctor too, because it could be other factors. I've had no prostate issues or anything like that my whole life. So that doesn't seem to be a factor in my case.
What about screens? Do you find that screens affect your sleep cycle personally?
So this is one where there's a lot of misinformation and what I call sleep cliches, because people tell you no screens in the bedroom. Screen is not the problem. Blue light coming from the screen is the problem. There have been studies done where I think I mentioned earlier, where you will fall asleep faster by a fire than you will without one. And why is that? Well, evolutionarily, fire it kept you warm, it kept predators away. A big one probably is it kept insects away. And the red shade of light that comes from a campfire or fireplace fire or something like that is very soothing and does not trigger your circadian cycle to wake up. And in fact, it's been measured to have the opposite effect. It tells your circadian cycle to go to sleep. So if we can stay away from blue light and stay closer to red light when we're going to sleep, we can not only be okay, but we can get to sleep faster. Of the 2,000 plus nights that I have logged of my own sleep and collected data, I would say most, if not all of them, I was watching television with the blue light removed when I fell asleep, because that's how I fall asleep. I watch old TV shows.
Okay.
I just drift right off. What I do in my house is I have a system set up where every screen, every light bulb, every light source in the house is tied into a computer program called Flux, which is free. You can get it. Great program. And as the sun starts setting outside, an artificial sunset starts taking place inside. The lights stay on, but they dim, and all the blue light goes out of them. I use Philips Hue bulbs, which are Wi-Fi controlled. And all the screens, all the lights start going from the red end of the spectrum or the blue end of the spectrum to the red end of the spectrum. If you have night shift on your iPhone, you'll see the same thing. A lot of programs, phones, tablets have added this feature in over the years. And I think every screen that we own, including television, should have it and will in the future. So I've got it built into my TVs now and everything. So when I'm in my bedroom, I have everything off except my TV. It's got all the blue light removed. I'm watching an old episode of Columbo or something with a timer, and I drift off, and it works every time. So I think the conventional wisdom of no screens in the bedroom is well intentioned, but I think the real thing is no blue light coming from a screen and no bright screens, and you'll be fine. A lot of people like to use blue light reducing glasses for this. I think that's a good second choice if you can't dim and recolor the light at its source, because unless the glasses touch all the way around your eyes, light can get in from the side. So I'll use them if I'm in a hotel room or something like that and can't hack the TV to change the brightness and the colors in it or something. So they're a good second choice. But I think controlling the actual lighting source is the best first choice.
That's fascinating to me, because we do hear so often that screens are one of the culprits of our poor sleep habits. And yet not so much for you. There's another story going on there. I have cut out screens before my bedtime, but my sleep scores generally are in the 70s on the days that I've tracked. You're doing considerably higher than that. So can you give us a snapshot of what your bedtime routine, quote unquote, looks like?
Yeah, and I should say I'm a computer programmer. I'm on screens. Literally, there are 5 televisions in my house. There are at least 7, 8, 10, and I live alone. There's 7, 8, 10 computers. I mean, if I could turn this around, you could see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 screens just right here within arm's reach of me. So if anyone was going to be affected by screen brightness and blue light, it would be me. So yeah, for me, my routine nowadays goes like this. Around I think it's 10 o'clock, I'll get a reminder on my phone saying, bedtime in an hour. And generally before then, these days during pandemic, I'm already moving that direction. There's not a lot to do after dark. I'm already moving that direction before I even get that. I'll have eaten dinner and everything before then, wrapped up the things that I need to do. And sometime between 10 and 11, I'll head into my bedroom and close everything up. All the lights in the rest of the house will be off at that point. It's winter now. The heat in the rest of the house will be off overnight because I'm only one person. I'm in the bedroom and I don't need to heat it. In my bedroom, I will not heat it. I can generally sleep better if it's colder, and I'll let it get down as low as 60 in there before I have a space heater in there that might come on. But most of the winter, I won't even use any heat at all. I'll wake up sometimes quite hot. Before bed, I'll take 300 micrograms of melatonin. I've been doing this for a very long time. It works very well. I use the Sundown brand. There's some discussion as to whether you're getting your money's worth with a lot of brands, and it's well tried and true. I find that when I take it, I drift off to sleep within 20 minutes easily. If I need to stay awake for some reason, I can also easily resist it, and that effect will diminish. But it works really well for me. And over 2,000 nights, it has like a 2%, I think, improvement effect on sleep. When I'm ready to go to bed, I will run Sleep Cycle on my phone. I have the radios turned off. It uses sound, so there's no Bluetooth or anything because radio fields have been shown to impact sleep when they're close to you in a bedroom. So that for people who are concerned about that, it's of no effect. And like I mentioned before, I want my phone off anyway so that I can't be bothered. I'll start that up and I will note whatever factors go into my sleep notes for that day, which are things that are being tracked, like did I exercise? What exercise did I do? Did I take any supplements? I took melatonin, et cetera, and those will get weighted into, versus all the nights, how much effect they've had over time, positive or negative. I'll get all my sleep cycle settings done and I'll put the phone in position, and then I will turn my television on, queue up from my repository of digital content. And this is important. I wouldn't watch live television at night or anything with the commercials recorded into it because the sound levels can be jarringly different. I will set my television to watch some old movie or episode of something that I want. Some of these I've watched hundreds of times, by the way. I'll tend to watch the same one and fall asleep, and then watch it the next night and fall asleep, and then I'll do that.
And do you find yourself watching the same scene each night because you haven't gotten through it?
Sometimes at some point I've fallen off in the same point so many times, I'll be like, okay, tonight I'll start at 20 minutes in.
Okay.
But I don't know why, but old episodes of Columbo really work for me. I think because 70s television was less jarring. It had less jump editing.
Okay.
It was quieter. It's kind of quite soothing to see like old places in Los Angeles and stuff. It's kind of like a quieter, gentler place and time. A lot of people I know watch like TCM, Turner Classic Movies, like the old movies and things like that. So older content and content without commercials is kind of crucial. I'll cue that up. I'll set the sleep timer for 60 or 90 minutes so the TV will shut off. I will set the screen, the preset setting where all the blue light is dimmed out. Then I'll get ready and just like lay back. And usually within 10 minutes, I'm not even watching the screen. I'm just kind of like half listening and then I'm out. If it's a noisy night with traffic or something, I might use earplugs because I live on a road where it's either quiet or it's not generally. That's about it. If all goes well, I'll wake up at 7 or 7:30, right around sunrise. I'll be able to see light. If I wake up and I don't see light, I know that it's still night, and I'll just assess what happened, and I'll try to change my position or whatever and go back to sleep. And probably 7 out of 10 times I can do that. Once in a great while, I'll wake up, and if I'm hungry, I will eat, because you can sleep when you're full, but you can't sleep when you're hungry. This is my take on it. I'm not good at fasting, so I know my weakness there.
Mike, sleep is supposed to be a boring subject, perhaps the most boring of subjects, right? But you've put together The War on Sleep, your book, and I really appreciated that it was really your narrative of this ongoing quest to kind of perfect the art of sleep, or at least get as good at it as you possibly can. For folks that want to share in that journey and learn more about both The War on Sleep and other things that you're up to, where's a good spot to kind of get some information on Michael Voss?
Well, I greatly appreciate that, because, I never set out to write a book. I just set out to solve a problem. And I accumulated so much knowledge and hacks and fixes for things that I just really wanted to share it with people. And the feedback has been overwhelming. I've collected so many books that weren't helpful. It felt good to put something out there. And I was contacted recently by a sleep expert from the UK who has more than 50 different books on sleep. And he said, by a great distance, mine is the only practical guide to better sleep he's ever read. And I was just floored. So I really appreciated it. You can find The War on Sleep on Amazon. It's available in paperback and in Kindle, and there's an Audible version coming hopefully soon, if I can get it done. You can find me on Clubhouse. I'm Voss001 for those who are on Clubhouse. Twitter, The War on Sleep, and also on, those are all the places for now. The waronsleep.com website is being revised, and when it comes up, it'll have a lot of nice free stuff on it, probably be in about April of this year, and that'll be back up and running. Feedback is always welcome. I greatly appreciate reviews on Amazon. We have all 5-star reviews so far, which I'm really proud of. War on Sleep was also the number 3 book on sleep disorders in Japan this past weekend, which really blew me away because it's not even translated into Japanese.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know how that happened, but I'm really, really happy about it. So.
Excellent. Well, Mike Voss, thank you so much for joining us. This was really informative, and appreciate the heavy legwork that you've done for so many of us in The War on Sleep.
Pleasure was all mine, and I hope everybody sleeps better tonight.
I love how he gamified sleep. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, I'm way into gamification, but gamifying sleep never occurred to me. But obviously, I'm starting now. My average sleep score last week was 72. What would be a good level reward for hitting an average of something like 80? I don't know. Share your thoughts on Facebook. Jump into the conversation at the Badass Dad Squad, our Facebook group where the conversation continues. You can also check out all things Badass Dadly at thebadpod.com. There's a page up there with links to Michael's book and info, as well as lots of other resources for becoming a badass no matter what age you are. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll get back with you next week with another mini episode. We're going to follow a theme. I'll be talking about taking a badass break in order to increase your productivity. It works. Some good life experience shared in that upcoming episode. If you want more like this episode right now, I suggest you check out the episode titled Mindfulness, Joy, and Parenting, or get more info on gamification, check out the Gamify Your Life episode. Thanks for joining in the quest for badassness with me. Okay, bye.